Hello, everyone. Wow, it's a shame you have to spend your time in such an ugly place. Must be really difficult to hang out here.
Thank you so much for joining us here today, Sophia.
Thank you.
I'd like to start off right at the beginning by talking about your early journey in acting. You got into acting through what was a mandatory requirement at your high school, and you describe your first play as love at first sight. So could you talk to us a bit about these early experiences?
Yeah, I was in school, I think, like a lot of young kids, you're on a track that your parents and sort of society teach you to be on. And when you're in a family like mine, which is my father's an immigrant and my mother is the daughter of an immigrant. So my mom's first generation and then I'm first generation of my dad. It was sort of, you can be a lawyer, a doctor, or a lawyer, were really my options. And I was feeling great about that. I wanted to go to medical school. I sort of thought that's the place. And I had to do this play and I was furious. I put it off for the 4 years of middle school until the last of the 4 semesters. I'm sorry, for the 2 years of middle school, last of 4 semesters. I'm very jet lagged. I love it here, but I have no idea what time it is. So I put it off and I thought, I can get out of this because I'm on the volleyball team. They'll obviously let me out of this. And they didn't, so I missed volleyball that semester and was livid. And something really magical happened in the process of working that play was that I realized my favorite subject had always been literature, studying literature and breaking down novels, and here was a novel come to life. And so I started to do theater all through high school. And it was my senior year when I was applying to colleges and universities that I told my parents, so I think I'm gonna go to a theater conservatory instead of medical school. They were thrilled, as you can imagine. My parents thought I would get bored. They didn't tell me this until many years later. My mom said to my dad, just relax, she's too smart. She'll be so bored of these people. There's no way. And a year into being in the BFA theater program, I actually was quite bored. No shade on any of the people I was there with, it felt small. The sort of world felt like it had been reduced for me, and I transferred into the journalism school and started studying journalism and political science. My parents thought, here we go, we're getting her back. And then I started booking jobs more and more and more, and I actually left just after my junior year in college because I booked One Tree Hill, which I almost didn't take because I thought, how could I give up my senior year in college? That's only gonna happen once. And luckily my advisor in the Annenberg School of Journalism said, are you out of your mind? Go and do the work. This is what you want to do. And I thought, it's this weird little show in North Carolina. It's probably not gonna be on for long anyway. I'll come back to school in like 3 years. 9 seasons later, I never went back.
And did you find that those kind of few months that you'd spent in journalism school helped your acting career in any way or helped your kind of creative process in any way?
For me, this is going to sound like it's not related, but I promise I'll come back around. So many people want me to help them throw surprise parties because they go, you're an actor, you'll be great at lying to this person. I'm a shit liar. Because my job is actually to find the truth on the page and figure out how to tell it. So I have to find the story that's in the layer underneath the words in the script. And that means that unless we've really come up with a great story for a surprise party, never tell me the details or the secret because I'll spoil it. I have a terrible poker face, I can't play poker either. But what I found was that being in the journalism school and really looking at systems and the way that the world works and looking at people's stories, how people move in the world, how they either show up for each other or fail each other, how they come to the defense of other people or have looked historically the other way when the indefensible is happening, that's where humanity is. And that gave me a way to see that layer underneath where just looking at a scene and having, a professor of theater say, well, why did you make that choice? I would go, because it felt right. I'm becoming very self-conscious. This feels antithetical to being a good actor for me. So I think that for so many of us, if we can expand the realm of our curiosity a little more than what might be typical or what might be taught, we can sometimes find ways into our work or into ideas that might seem roundabout but that take us to the truth rather than to the obvious, which might not feel to me or you as an individual that inspiring.
So to talk then about your big break on One Tree Hill, what was it like being a student and then suddenly a household name so quickly?
Absolutely insane and traumatizing and beyond weird. And the thing that no one tells you is that no one tells you anything. No one tells you how to be an adult, what a set is like. You don't have an advisor. You don't have, a house mom or a person who's assigned to tell you how something works. So you get there and everyone thinks you're an adult, but you are a child who is now just wildly more responsible for things and you don't know how they work. So I feel like for so many of us, and I can say us because I love school and there's nothing that I love more than a lecture. I still go to lectures for fun. Everyone's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, why wouldn't I be here? You're so lucky to be here. I attend, weekend gatherings at universities that I love. I truly love school. But no one at a university, in my experience, or in the experiences of most other adults I've ever spoken to, teaches you anything really practical about how to enter into the world and do things. So you might be a brilliant thinker, you might be a great researcher, you might be a great writer, but how you're meant to sort of live as an adult is very strange. So when you show up at 21 and you begin to work on a show that is its own machine, where you're shooting 16 to 18 hours a day, you're memorizing 9 pages of dialogue a day, and then expected to forget all of it to memorize again the next day. It's not a great thing for life. If you tell me a story, I'll remember it word for word. 6 months from now, I'll have no idea you told it to me. But if you give me the opening sentence, I can recall your whole story to you. But this can be very frustrating for people in my life who are like, oh my God, I told you this. I'm like, just begin again. I'm so sorry. There's things you don't get warned about like that. And then there's also the reality that in America, you've just become allowed to order a beer in a bar. And also everyone now knows your face. And you're like, I'm just here because I'm so excited I can order a beer, but also this is weird. And how do I interact with strangers who know me, who I don't know? And it's all very, very bizarre.
And are there any particularly bizarre experiences that stand out, at least from the early days?
Funny experiences or scary experiences? Because there's both. Yeah, it's weird when people begin in a small town like that. We filmed that show in a small town on the North Carolina coast, and it's a university and all old guys who've retired and live there to play golf. So there's no one to hang out with, because you can't, when you're essentially just have graduated college, you're that age, you can't hang out with 19-year-old kids who are your biggest fans. That's a recipe for disaster. And you can't hang out with a bunch of guys your dad's age who play golf unless that's your thing, but it isn't mine. So we were just sort of there together. And if it is, good for you, great. But we were all just sort of trapped there together, and it was, as the famous saying goes, it was the best of times and the worst of times. We had great fun, but it also is weird in a small place when people figure out where you live and just show up at your house and think that that's appropriate. Or when you've been on for so many years, I joked, because obviously we went through our 20s there, but as you know, you go to university for the 4 years you go. So we got older, but the college kids in town just stayed the same age. And what I realized was that there's an odd relational difference with people, which sometimes is very special. Someone who's, all of you came to see me speak, that's amazing. This is special for me. It can be weird when someone registers me as incredibly familiar, because I'm in their house with them every week. Sometimes I'm in bed with them all day when they have the flu and they're binging the show. I'm in their intimate space. But to me, this person is a stranger. And we've been raised our whole lives with that phrase, stranger danger. So I've had experiences where people think they know me and will touch me in ways they would touch their best friends or their intimate partners, but I don't know them. So the time that someone ran up to me and was so excited that she reached for my face and then ran her fingers through my hair, and I went, oh my God, she went, oh my God, Sophia Bush, and I went, oh my God, that's my face. And we just stood there and looked at each other, and she went, I'm sorry. And I was like, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry, but now maybe you're uncomfortable, which mortifies me, and I don't know what to do. And she was like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, just please don't touch me. What do you want? You know, and it's sort of funny, but it's also, it can be very weird. And it's an odd thing to try to, while you're learning how to have a career and balance the schedule and do your job and be a professional, and if you're OCD like me, know your lines and everyone else's, just in case, to try to figure out also how to establish sort of a healthy relationship with being in the public eye and boundaries that make you and your body feel safe and respected. Again, no one teaches us any of these things.
And do you feel like now, all these years later, you've established that balance?
Yeah, I think that I've gotten better at figuring out how to navigate the sort of uncomfortable side orders of this menu item, if you will. And I think I've also just maybe changed my relationship with sort of expectation. I think I have a healthier relationship with the career because there were many years where my work was my life. And with the schedule and with the travel, and when you pick up and you move and you leave everyone you know and any kind of sense of home you've ever had, and you do it over and over and over again, I kind of poked my head up like a little meerkat after a decade and went, I might need to do this a little differently. I might need to consider where I want to go or what I'm willing to work on or who I'm willing to work for a little bit differently, because I have to figure out how to have a life and how to love my work. But if all I'm doing is working, then what of my life do I love? So I think, you know, regardless of, regardless of whatever world it is that you're working in, whatever arena or field, it's really important for us to start to determine what life looks like and how work fits into it. Because society everywhere will tell us to work and work and work and work and work. You know, we'll give you everything you need at work so you never have to go home. Thank you, but why don't you want me to go home? You know, we have to start sort of examining that. And I think that that's true for all of us, regardless of what it is we do for a living.
On a slightly different note, I wanted to talk about Brooke Davis, the character, your character in One Tree Hill. Throughout the show, she went through quite an evolution as a character, and I was wondering if you could tell us what it was like for you to go through this journey with the character.
Wow, sometimes I would get a script and go, no, you don't really want me to, okay. So I'd really have to figure out, again, how to find what was underneath it. And I fought for her a lot. Firstly, because I had to play her, and there were days when I didn't want to, because I thought she was wildly irresponsible. But the fun thing was that over the years, you sort of move with a character when you do it that long. It was sort of like these parallel rivers. We'd be far apart at times, and then they'd come together and flow together and spread apart. And there were moments when I really got to put things that were important to me in her, and there were moments that I got to have a wild adventure being and behaving really in ways that were just so different from any way that I would ever behave. But there's elemental pieces of both of us that are similar. We're fiercely loyal, quick to anger at injustice, but I'm quick to that sort of sacred rage of like, oh, we will burn it down and build a new society. If this is how society thinks it's going to work. She gets like a little madder about personal things, but it's cool. We tap into the feeling. Yeah, it's a wild thing to be with someone for that long. Because, for example, we made 187 hours, 187 episodes of One Tree Hill. I did the most episodes of any character at 186, thanks. But that took me 35,000 hours of my life to film a TV show for as many episodes and as many seasons as we did. Took roughly 35,000 hours. So it's a very wild thing because sometimes I forget about her, and then sometimes I'm like, well, she's mine. People will say to me, I am Brooke Davis's biggest fan. And I'm like, are you? I think I'm her biggest fan. I promise, because we went through hell and high water together. But yeah, I have a love and an understanding for her as her co-creator. And I think in a way, wrestling with some of her behavior and seeing what a beautiful person this character was underneath some of that behavior made me more patient with people who I maybe don't agree with. Yeah.
So your contribution to One Tree Hill was not just limited to being Brooke. You also went off screen and you directed a few of the episodes. What was that like, and is this something you'd like to carry on doing in the future?
Oh yeah, it's phenomenal. Directing's wonderful. It makes me feel exponentially more invested in the product. And for a person like me who really I love math and I love systems and I love every little detail of things. I mean, my directing binders are almost embarrassing in how coordinated they are. I draw aerial maps of everything. Everyone gets a color, everyone gets a letter. It's like, it's a little bit Beautiful Mind, but productive. And there's something, I think, especially when you've done something for so long, and everything becomes relative. You get used to everything in your life. And so you're working on a TV show that some people think is the best show on TV, and you're like, yeah, it's cool. I mean, I like my 9 to 5, but it's really like a 7 to 10 p.m. And directing opens it up again in a way. And you look at everything in a different way, and you look at everyone in a different way. And I loved it, and it was part of what staying on that show for so long, part of what made it feel so fulfilling for me. And certainly changed the way that I look at things on other sets. I am the crew's favorite person on a set, because if we have a monster day, I'll look at the way something's blocked and grab one of my coworkers and go, why don't we just come from this side and then walk into this close-up shot, and the DP is standing in the back. That's the director of photography who manages the cameras, and he'll just go, because I'm like, I would save us 2 hours. Let's be less complicated. It's made me much more technically adept. And there's a great sort of analogy that somebody gave me once, that acting is a bit like building a chair. It can be beautiful. It can be a piece of art. You can build like a Hans Wegner wishbone chair that stays classic forever. But it has to hold a person. It has to be technically sound enough for us to sit here. So being technically sound is actually the point, and then you can make it as basic or as intricate as you desire. And when you think about it that way, when you think about like, look, we just have to build this chair, I just really want to build very efficiently, because if this is a scene, people only see the two of us, but there's essentially this many more people on a set, working the set the whole time to film this conversation. And all of those people want to get home and have dinner with their kids at the end of the night,
So turning to your more recent projects, particularly voice acting, in 2018 you starred in Incredibles 2 as the voice of Void.
Yeah.
Is that something you'd always wanted to do?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Being in a Pixar film was major bucket list. Incredibles is my favorite Pixar movie. I was in public, wildly embarrassing, when the letter came in. And an actual physical letter, which I have and I framed, obviously, comes in from Brad Bird, who's the writer and the director of the films, who voices Edna and a bunch of other characters. He's a genius. But it goes to my agents. So my agents, knowing that I'm gonna faint, don't call me. They scan the letter and then they email it to me, and then my agent actually texted me, because I don't check my email. There's like only so many things I can keep up with in a day. She's like, you read the news from 12 different papers every day, and you won't read your email? I'm like, that's my priority, I'm sorry. So I get a text from her and she says, open your email right now. And I open it, and this letter opens on my phone. And so I zoom in on it, and because I'm like, what is this? It's Incredibles letterhead, what's going on? And it just says, you've been offered the role of void. And I started screaming, and then I burst into tears. Totally fine. People were like, is she okay? And my friend I was with, thank God, went, it's really good news. It's great. She's happy. And I couldn't believe it. And I learned that I had gone up to Pixar maybe 2 years prior while they were animating The Good Dinosaur to take meetings and just to tell everybody, listen, even if you want someone to run coffee, I'm a little bit of a coffee snob. I'm great at it. I'll get coffee for you guys. I just want to be here. I want to learn. And I'd met with a few people, and what they do is they sample your voice from things that you've done, and then they start splicing lines in with other voices that are going to be in the films to see how people sound together. And Brad Bird said, we really want you to come in and do this. And he said, and your character is Elastigirl's biggest fan. And I was like, cool, I'm your biggest fan. This is gonna be great. And it worked out. It worked out so well, and it was really a really fun adventure.
So before we turn to questions from the audience, I wanted to talk a bit about your work as an activist. You've worked for the past several years, you've been a vocal advocate of various social and human rights causes. And I wanted to ask particularly about organizations such as Do Something and the US EPA that you've worked with towards kind of environmental policy and awareness. What do you think, given what is going on in the world with climate change and the climate emergency that we see around us, what do you think these organizations need to do now?
I mean, I think it requires radical social change. You know, Rachel Carlson wrote Silent Spring in 1962. None of this information about the climate changing and our human impact on the globe is new, but we are really hesitant to change systems, especially when certain systems that are so bad for the planet make so much money for so few people. People don't want to give up power. And very often when social change begins to happen, equality feels like oppression to those who have always been in the position of supremacy. This is incredibly problematic for the rest of us who've never held the keys to that very rarefied castle room. And I think I'm excited. It's an interesting thing because you've obviously done your homework, but recently I spoke at something and someone said, you know, the last couple of years you've stepped into politics. And I was like, or just you've been paying attention. You know, 10, 11 years ago, when I started being as politically vocal as I am, I remember I had people on my team, one of whom is here, not this person, but I'm just saying, because like new guys, we see like this. But I had someone on my team who said to me, you cannot do this. You cannot be this political. Pick the cause, go to the gala, write the check, but stop talking. And I was like, well, cool, you're fired. What do I do with this platform if not something? And what excites me is that we see, probably a decade ago I said in an interview, for me, activists, change makers, those people are the rock stars. I want those people to be on the cover of Rolling Stone. And now you look at Greta Thunberg on the cover of Teen Vogue, and I'm like, yes, it's happening. I think that the awareness, I think that the way we're all able to commune with each other digitally, the way that we're able to share stories, the way that we're able to look at news in the moments it's happening because of all of these social platforms, that changes our perception. But I think, again, the real power has been held in these strange conglomerates, and it's up to us to get educated on it. It's up to us to call for the disbanding of some of those practices, rules, organizations. We have to know. And for me, environmental activism was always just part of who I was. I grew up in Southern California. And people think of LA as this weird Hollywood place. I'm like, that's the people who move there who make it that way. You know, for us, for people who are from California, we grow up in the ocean and in the mountains and in the forests and in the desert. The environment is our playground. And the idea that we wouldn't protect it, this idea that we throw things away, they don't go away, they just go somewhere else. We have to really think about our impact on this planet. We have to think about what it is we're doing with our time, with our energy, with our platforms, whether they're of a few million people or a few hundred people or 25 people. Every single person has the potential and the power to be a change maker in their circle. And if everyone did just one thing every day, the world would change. when one of us educates our parent on something they might not have a touch point to because of a lack of technology, like, our parents tell their friends. You guys, every time I see a political meme from an account that I follow online, my dad has already liked it. I'm obsessed with him. My dad is 72, and he said, you know, you sent me all of these things, and you told me to follow all of these people, and I just had this conversation with your uncle, and did you realize he didn't know this? And so I sent him 3 articles, and you know, now, I mean, begrudgingly, but like, he's coming over to our side, and I'm going, look at my dad, he's a 72-year-old activist. Who knew? So I really think that it has to come top down, obviously, because legislation and policy have to change, but the top doesn't change unless the bottom demands it. So really, it's a simultaneous movement of change making to redistribute power. We have enough power. Power is like air, there's enough for everyone. We have enough resources on this planet. We have to start choosing to spend as much time educating ourselves on what's going on in the world and the ways that we can change it as we do aimlessly scrolling on said even political meme Instagram accounts. We have to do the work, and then we know what to demand, and we outnumber them. So when young people say to me, well, I don't really think my voice counts, or I don't really know who to vote for, I'm like, not an excuse. Let's go. I'm gonna tell you some things to look at. I'm gonna tell you some places to go. I'm gonna give you a line to text, sadly not here, I'm sorry. But in the US, to check if you're registered and to get information about your local elections, you know, there are so many pieces of information and ways to get involved available to us now. And they're so much less harder to find than they were for the generation behind us. And that's actually what makes me feel really hopeful. Because you do look at the young kids and they're climate striking on Fridays. I'm like, the kids are all right. You know, we're gonna be okay.
One final question from me before we turn to the audience. It's about the Me2 movement and the Hollywood's Time's Up movement, which you particularly have been involved with. You spoke at the Women's March in 2018. You spoke in support of Christine Blasey Ford during the Kavanaugh hearings. My question is about the criticism that the Me2 movement has faced, that people say it's gone too far, it's made unfounded accusations. How do you think the Me2 movement can be resilient to these criticisms?
I actually don't care about the criticisms at all. I really don't. I think that some of the critiques, well, we know some of the critiques come from bots. We know that some of the accounts that post these questionable gray area stories about, is that really worthy of talking about assault? We know they're coming from bots. I also think that the pendulum has been swung so far on the necks of women for so many generations that if it overcorrects for a little while and men say, I'm just like not sure if I can hug you at work, I'm like, maybe just don't. Just don't. I don't actually worry for you. This idea that, you know, people are afraid to talk to each other, it's like if you don't know how to talk to a woman in a public space because you're afraid you're gonna get accused of assault, you have a much bigger problem. Like if you don't know where the line is, we need to do much more work as a society. And I mean, really, it's like everybody needs to calm down a little bit. But at the end of the day, we've lived in such a culture that has made people so uncomfortable for so long. And yes, Me Too typically, when you hear the phrase, you think about women who've come forward. But I don't know what the statistics are here in the UK. I don't know if they're similar, but in the United States, 1 in 4 women will have been sexually assaulted or raped by the time she has graduated from college. So by the time a woman is 21, 25% of us have been assaulted. But the number for men is 1 in 6. Men are talking about it more rarely. But when you hear about these young boys' sports teams where a group of male athletes gangs up on the smallest guy on the team and sexually assault him as a group in a locker room, we as a society need to overcorrect. Whatever this idea, this exertion of I will enforce sexual trauma on you as a show of my power, of my virility, of my dominance, this is broken. When the cover of Time magazine talks about the effects on some entire continents on rape being used as a weapon of war, when we look back in history and we look at post-emancipation in the United States, the forced sterilization of Black women, control of the body, and in particular control of the female body, but dominance exerted on any body is inappropriate. And humans, in some ways, are incredibly daft, and we make the same stupid mistakes over and over again. We ignore climate science. We say never again when we talk about some of our worst human rights atrocities, but look at what's happening at the United States border right now, for example. We're putting children in cages. We have concentration camps without death chambers, which is actually arguable because 31 people that we know of and counting have died in those cages at the United States southern border. So this for me, the tether of assault, the tether of my own experiences as a woman in the entertainment industry who's been mistreated at work, that tether, when you pull on that string and you realize that it has knit this big, ugly sweater and all of these issues are connected, again, it's up to us to really get frank about what kind of spaces we want to live in. And if for now, people shake hands at work instead of like moving each other's bodies aside by touching on the small of the back, I hate that. I don't mind. I think an overcorrection is actually really good for us. And I think instead of being enraged by it, we should say, how can we learn from each other? How could you and I, as a man and a woman, have an empathetic conversation about what we've each experienced in the world that's made us uncomfortable? How could a circle of us women sitting together, opening up about our experiences, maybe help us know who to talk to and how to defend each other better when maybe we see something that's a little questionable but not so questionable that we're not quite sure and we don't want to say the thing because then maybe I look stupid or maybe I make you feel awkward. Maybe we would know how better to navigate those situations if instead of going, oh, look at this mess, we went, this could actually be a tipping point for humanity. This could be a point where we could use historical patterns of problems as a platform for empathetic education. Those things actually feel very exciting to me. I'm like, swing that pendulum to the other side, let's go. And that doesn't mean it's always pretty. There are plenty of people who wish that I would stop talking about this. But my response is always, I'll stop talking about the problem when the problem is solved.
Great, fantastic. We have some time for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, put your hand up and a microphone will come straight to you.
I saw you first.
Yes, if we go to the hand in the corner over there. Yes, please, and the microphone should be coming to you. It's behind you.
Hi, Sophia. First of all, thank you for being here.
Thank you for coming. You guys all came out on a Tuesday night, by the way. Thank you so much.
We actually graduated a couple of years ago, but we found out about the event, so we drove.
Oh my God! Well, thank you extra specially.
So my question is about your activism work. You're really great at speaking up for communities who don't have the platform that you do, and don't look like you do as well. So my question is, what advice would you give to the people in this room about how they can use their privilege and their platform to speak up about issues that are affecting society as a whole?
Well, I think each of us understands what it feels like to be marginalized in some way, right? And for me, I understand what the pressures are in the working world as a woman. I understand the way that I get spoken to. I understand the way that my intellect is questioned. I understand whatever my specific experience is. So I can really relate to every woman in this room. But I also know that my experience as a white woman is going to be very different than your experience as a woman of color. That doesn't mean that my experience has been diminished. It doesn't mean that my trauma is any less. It doesn't mean that my successes mean any less. It simply means that I can acknowledge that you experience something that I don't. And then why wouldn't I ask you what your experience is? Because I hate being oppressed. How does oppression feel to you? How do we solve the problem together? Again, as the adage goes, our liberty is bound together. So if I succeed, if I get to walk through a door and I don't hold the door open for you, what was really the point? Like, who wants to go to a party alone? I don't. And to me, if we could snap our fingers and solve the world's problems and create true equality on the planet, that would be like the greatest party ever. So I think about it again in data-driven and well-researched points, but I think that thinking about it from a hopeful perspective is a really important shift. A lot of people hear the words activism or volunteerism or intersectionality and they're like, oh God, but I think those should be things that light us up rather than make us feel like there's going to be too much work to get to them. So I think that's really part of it for me. And again, understanding that I have a platform. So if the national news, when there was a woman in the US, and Nia Wilson, who was murdered, she was at the BART station with her sister. She was this young, beautiful girl who happened to be black, and a white supremacist slit her throat in front of her sister for no reason other than the color of her skin. And the national news media in America wasn't talking about it. But I can talk to 5 million people a day across platforms, so I wrote about it. And by the end of the week, all of these other people were sharing about it. And I don't think I was the first person to share the news of her death, but I was on the early side. And what happens is that one person can cause a snowball and make something bigger. And so that's why I always try to tell people, like, you have a platform. I don't know how many followers you have, but it doesn't matter. If it's 10 or 10,000, you can put something up. You can share something that other people will share and that other people will share. And we have this ability now to, kind of create these massive runaway trains or, digital flash mobs of information. And that's exciting to me. And I think what better action to take with my relative privilege, which isn't the privilege of, like Lady Gaga is like one of the most famous entertainers on earth, right? And she has like 100 million Instagram followers. I can't do what she can do, but I know what I can do, and I know how I can help you. And then I know that when you're doing something, you're also helping me. And I know that when we're doing something, we're also helping all the men in the room. It's for us. And I think that the fear that some people feel when they say, I don't know how to advocate, or I don't know what to say, I just always say, well, then you haven't asked enough questions, and that's okay. But if you walk into any space where you may not have an answer and say, I'd just like to know how to help the helpers, and then before you know it, you'll be a helper. So that's kind of the way I try to think about that. Thank you.
If we go to the hands there, yeah, that's fine.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm from France, and over there last week, 3 12-year-olds boy raped a girl that was their age. And you're saying that you love school, and I wanted to know what's your view on what should be done at school and in education regarding like all that's going on regarding the sexual abuse and everything.
I produced a documentary this year, and it's called A Girl Named C, and it's about our subject is a girl whose first name starts with C, and C was in school in New Jersey, and she was 11 at the time of her assault, and she was raped by an 11-year-old classmate of hers. And the thing that strikes me about it so much is that the day after this happened, this boy put a Post-it note in her locker that said, "See, I love you, we did it," with all these exclamation points. He was celebrating. This is a boy who started being shown pornography at 8 or 9 years old, whose parents didn't know this. And this is in an environment where we don't teach sex ed to kids until junior high, because we think that that's appropriate. Because for whatever reason around the world, we like sexualize everybody in ways that are insane to me, and then we also are hyper puritanical in ways that make no sense. And we're missing this window, and because we as adults want to pretend that kids at those ages couldn't possibly be sexual, we're ignoring that our lack of educating them about their bodies is actually allowing them to be sexualized in dangerous ways, and that they have access to things regardless of any parental protection you put on a device. And this is why these things are happening. And I don't believe that any 10 or 11 or 12-year-old child is inherently seeking to be violent toward other children. But I think there's a solution if we can get this strange idea that we have that we shouldn't expose kids to such content. Do you know Esther Perel? She's an incredible researcher. She's sort of like the global expert on marriage and family and sex therapy. You should all watch her TED Talks. You're welcome. And Esther and I, she's Belgian, and we were having a discussion about sort of the differences in all these different countries about the way that we talk about bodies and sex and consent. And she was telling me that in certain Nordic countries, they begin consent and intimacy education at 4 years old. So they start teaching kids on the playground, will you ask for a hug? Maybe before you hug that person, ask them if you may. Give this person a high five. This is how you introduce yourself. This is how you talk about your body. Your body is your space. You can say that you want a hug coming into class on Monday, and on Tuesday say, I don't feel like a hug. They start teaching kids bodily autonomy in ways that are completely unsexual. And every 2 years, there's addition to this curriculum. And so there's never this gap where kids don't understand where the line is. And this intimacy education moves into sex education very seamlessly. And again, I don't know the statistics, but it's been told to me that you see far less of this sort of early onset assault in places that do this. And I don't know why as a planet we haven't just adopted it. And so my hope, again, is that an informed constituency, like all of us in this room, can begin to press for those things, can ask the schools that we attend what their policies are. Press universities for better, accurate transparency on assaults on campus and for how they deal with them. Press elementary schools and high schools for better sex education. Even when we're young, we have the right to ask for these things. And if in this room, you're university age, you were in high school not that long ago, call your old high school and say, I'm an alum. I want to know what your policy is on this. I saw this documentary and I can't believe that this happened in a middle school. What is our middle school doing? Make some noise. It's very effective. You had a question too.
Time for one final question, unfortunately. So if we go to
He had raised
the
his
hand in front.
Yeah. I've been timing. Sorry.
Thank you. So thanks for coming out to us. I wanted to tangentially build on that. Has your status as a beauty symbol ever interfered with people's perception of your activism, for example, positively or negatively?
Oh, totally. People touch me all the time and think they have a right to, and it really bothers me. And I've also had people want to thrust their opinion, whatever their perception is of me, back at me. First, it's generally in a way that's a bit inappropriate, with an expectation. And when I don't meet that expectation, then it's used as an insult, which I always find interesting. I'm like, so you just complimented me with this idea, your idea of me was a compliment, and now your idea of me is supposed to be an insult to me. Are you okay? It can be very strange because, for whatever reason, people think, what do you know? How smart could you possibly be? I get a lot of shut up and act, or could you just sit still, shut your mouth, and look pretty for me? No, it's not my responsibility. It's not what I came here to do. I've never looked at a person and say, shut up and study, or shut up and bank tell, or shut up and see patients at the hospital. I've never told a person they don't have a right to be a participant in their own democracy because of their career. But there is a perception that people in entertainment must all just be vapid idiots who won some version of a genetic lottery. And I'm like, I'm not as tall as my mom. I don't have the body my mom had at 35. I wish I did. Oh well. She could have been a supermodel. I'm short and I don't know, I eat pasta. It's never happening for me. But there is a very odd thing when a person designates you as something and then tries to also use that something to diminish your actual value. Because, look, sure, is it an okay thing for someone to think you're attractive? Great. Thanks for the compliment, I guess. But that doesn't last. I think that the things that we should all be pursuing are participation in society, our education, because all of us are gonna get old, all of us are gonna get wrinkly, all of us are gonna get gray hair. Our brain is truly the only part of our body that ever lasts. And so, you know, when somebody wants to say you can't possibly know anything about that because of what you do or what you look like, I'm like, do you know what I studied in university? I'm gonna mop the floor with you, let's go. It's kind of fun to prove people wrong.
I think we can take one more if that's okay with you. Yeah, second row.
Oh.
Hi, Sophia. Thanks again.
Hi.
You talked about the concentration of power and having sympathetic conversations, but Middle America actually makes the case that Hollywood maintains soft power given its sociocultural impact in coastal and blue states. So given that you read a host of newspapers, you mentioned 12, are you as an activist also open to discussing with people who espouse different views, and have you had particularly enlightening experience if you've already done so?
Absolutely, and I do it quite frequently. You know, I grew up in California, but I lived in the Deep South for a decade. I lived in the Midwest for half a decade. I've lived more outside of the coasts than in them. And what I find frustrating is the way that people are being manipulated. And in particular, some of the people in America who are struggling the most, farmers in the Midwest, are being fed so many lies about what policies are helpful or harmful to their lives that they're voting against their own interests. And I don't judge the people for the way they're voting. I judge the system that makes the dissemination of information work in the way that it does. You know, it's shocking when you look at education levels and voting patterns, how it tends to go. So it's no surprise, but I find it sad that in my country, the far right has been actively trying to dismantle education and access to it because they know that that's how they remain in power. I think it's incredibly important for us to sit with people who have different views than we do, who have different opinions than we do. But what I won't do is sit with a person whose difference of opinion is rooted in their belief that I don't deserve to exist. Someone who is just an all-out racist, I would never say that it's the responsibility of a person of color to sit and try to educate that person about their right to exist. That's dangerous and not okay. Could I maybe debate with that person? Maybe, but I might get really heated. I think we really, again, we have to be open, we have to be willing to talk to people. I try to talk to as many people who live outside of what my assumed bubble is, even though I don't really live in one, as I can. And I also think we have to advocate for those people to have better resources. You know, somebody I remember in the last election cycle was like, you're just voting, you know, for your taxes and you're some like, you know, rich actress. And I was like, first of all, I don't make as much money as Jennifer Lawrence. I wish I did good for her. Second of all, I'm voting to raise my own taxes so that your kids can have free lunch in school. Because I think lunch debt in the United States is an insane thing. That children are put in debt because they can't afford school lunch, that's wrong. You know, and this person was like, well, I don't have any kids. And I said, well, somebody in your neighborhood has kids who can't afford lunch at school. And it's my pleasure to pay taxes for that. I'd love to pay taxes to eradicate lunch debt. I don't particularly want to pay taxes on contracts going to Halliburton to build planes we don't need. But again, that's why our votes matter, because we have the potential power to change what the balance of power looks like in our houses of government. And that's true anywhere in the world. And so I think being willing to have inclusive conversation is important. And I also think we have to be really realistic about who can do that and who wants to do that. Because I'm very willing to do that. It's my pleasure to do that. It's why I go to Texas and to Iowa and to the Carolinas and anywhere else that the Democratic Party needs me to go to door knock, I'm there. I show up at people's houses. Like, let me tell you, every once in a while, I'm like, no, and somebody opens the door and goes, holy shit. And I'm like, hey, do you want to talk politics? You know, I like it. But some people don't like that, and we shouldn't expect them to do it. And I think that in a fully functioning society, we have to advocate for each other and we have to protect each other, and everyone needs to be protected in different ways and everyone needs to be advocated for in different ways. But there's enough of us on the planet that I really think we can do it if we root ourselves in a sort of foundational belief about community rather than this sort of scarcity model where we're all so afraid that we're going to be the one person who gets left behind, that we're willing to, you know, eat our neighbors. It's like we're going to be okay if we show up for each other.
Great. I think
Thanks.
that is all we have time for today. Sophia, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your powerful thoughts and experiences. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you
please
for
join
having
me
me.
in thanking.
Thank you guys so much.